Hi guys, and welcome to episode 15 of Behind the Frame. In this series, we take wildlife images, we have a look at some of the settings and details behind the actual image, and then look at how we process the image in Lightroom. Today I've chosen an image which is probably one of my favorites from the Masai Mara. An incredible afternoon spent sitting waiting for a lioness to return to a buffalo carcass which she'd actually taken up a tree. Yes, you heard me correctly, lioness with a buffalo carcass in a tree. Sure, it was a young calf, but nonetheless an incredible sighting. And this was our first afternoon in the Mara with just one guest. He was combining 2 weeks back to back, and it was just myself and him this afternoon. We went out and we literally camped out at the base of this tree with this lioness for the entire afternoon, with the hope of her climbing up and going back to this carcass. So this is the shot that we'd envisaged and we'd set up for, and spent well over an hour or two waiting for this to happen. It was taken at 1,000th of a second, f9 and ISO 640. So obviously that shutter speed is there to try and freeze movement. We knew that the lioness was going to scramble up the tree. We used the angle of the tree. If you have a look here, it kind of slopes up and to the right. There's no ways she's going to jump up from the right-hand side of this tree. So we were just quite fortunate that everything played into our hands here. So we knew she was going to come up to the left. We could compose the frame using 70 to 200s if I recall. So this was shot at 70 mils, 1,000th of a second to freeze that movement, f9 to capture detail throughout the scene, and obviously ISO 640, which was then the combination of that whole setup. 5D Mark III, one of the workhorses in the Canon range. And as you can see, everything just came together here. Beautiful light falling on the foreground, dark blue dramatic sky starting to develop in the background, a good understanding of animal behavior, and a wealthy dose of patience, which always pays off in the wild. So looking at the image, we're going to start to process it. I'm going to go through on the basic panel. The first thing that I notice is everything feels a little bit warm, and if we were to cool things down, we're going to be able to punch those clouds a little bit. So I'm just going to drop the white balance on here, or the color temperature, down to somewhere around here. That probably looks a little bit washed out. So I think somewhere like that. We can always come back and adjust that just now. I want to drop the exposure just a touch, just to bring back some of those blues, because now for me this sighting is as much about the dark blue sky as it is about the actual wildlife and the subject going up here. Right, we're going to look at highlights. Going to pull the highlights down just to recover any little areas that may be blowing out in the grass up front here. Going to lift the whites a touch, looking at that histogram. I'm not going to go all the way now just using the white slider, because remember we're going to come down to the tone curve and we're going to use the contrast slider to add a little bit more, and that's going to stretch that histogram out a touch more. Blacks we're quite happy with there at the moment. Clarity, we want to lift that just a touch across the whole scene, so I'm not going to go in and do any localized adjustments here. Vibrance and saturation. So saturation we're going to lift up to a value of 4. That's my standard on a Canon system. And the vibrance, we do want to try and bring out, you'll see that as we lift this slider here, that the yellows and the blues become a little bit more vibrant. Funny that, because it's a vibrant slider. You can see there's some dark areas in this tree here. I just want to see what happens if we use our shadows slider and just lift that slightly. You see the difference there? It's something subtle, but it just makes the tree a little less dark, adding a little bit more life into these leaf areas around there. Tone curve. Now again, remember this is localized contrast, so rather than using the global contrast slider, we always look for that S-shaped kind of curve where we're just going to lift the lights a touch and pull down the darks just a hint here. Somewhere along those lines. Now by lifting those lights, we may have introduced a bit more on the highlight side of things, so I just want to see if we pull that down. And you'll see that the detail back in this grass just comes through quite nicely then. On the HSL slider, this is something that's quite interesting again. Remember hue, saturation, and luminance. So we've got a lot of orange in this, and I really want that sky to pop. So what I'm going to do is on the saturation option on the HSL slider, I'm going to lift the saturation of the blues a little bit. And then on the luminance side of things, we're going to pull that down a touch. So remember, luminance refers to how bright or how dark. And that is obviously way too much. And we're just going to pull that down a little bit. So have a look with the HSL slider, what we've done there, just with the saturation and luminance. Just made that sky punch a little bit more than what it was originally. I think we can touch that saturation up just a little bit more there. All right, detail panel. So this is where we're going to sharpen, and most importantly, where we're going to mask out. So remember, as we increase our masking slider, anything that is left white which is a hard edge, that will be sharpened. And this was shot at f9, so we're expecting this to have a little bit more of a depth throughout the scene, and you can see it happening there, that the foreground, the lioness, the tree, and then starting to drop off into that background is what's going to be sharpened. And I'm happy that we're going to leave it somewhere along those lines. And then lens corrections. So the 70 to 200 does have a little bit of distortion to it. So if we enable the profile correction here, there you can see. Do you see how that image has just popped a little bit? And that just sorts out the distortion that's caused by the lenses. This is more prominent on your wide angle lenses. So if you were to photograph a journey of giraffe, for example, with the Nikon 1424, you're going to see a little bit of curvature on the side there. And to an extent, the profile corrections here from the lens side of things in Lightroom, it'll pick it up automatically and apply a correction to that for you. So the last little thing is we want to just have a look at cropping. Feels like this may be slightly off, and I think judging on that back. So the Mara is one of these places where the horizons tend to play on your mind quite a bit, but I think that we've just kind of corrected that a little bit. I'm going to lock that one in, and from a white balance point of view, it feels a little orange at the moment, and that's probably because of the contrast that we added in the lights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my color temperature just to bring that back down again, and have a look at that. So by cooling this down, we are now taking away some of the oranges and yellows that were maybe a touch too much in this foreground here, but at the same time we're enhancing the blues in the background. And that's really all we want to do. A very quick and simple edit on an image which has a powerful story to tell, had all the ingredients of a great sighting and a great photograph. Looking at it before and after, if we were to reset this image completely, you'll see that there is a little bit of correction with the horizon line, but you'll see that that orange wash from the white balance has been removed. We've dialed up the presence of those blue clouds, and we've just made the scene a little bit sharper and punchier. And that's all it is. So when you have all the ingredients of a great sighting coming together like this to make such a great photograph, there really is very little that you need to do in Lightroom other than polish off the diamond that you've found or captured in this instance. That's it for this week. I'm off to Botswana on Saturday. Very excited to be back in the field, and we'll catch up with you guys again soon. As always, if you have any questions or have seen images that you would like to understand a little bit more, please do let us know. You can drop me an email and we'll get the guys to get onto it for you. Cheers.